Well, you know what? I will start off with a question, one for Aisha. When you put this together and you started off from this jumping point of a Love Bizarre and was able to take it into hip hop, how were you
Mhm.
able to make those connections? And why did you think that this particular song would bring you so deeply into this through line between Prince and hip hop?
To
Yeah.
be perfectly honest, I don't know. It's one of those things where I was sitting in my car and I'm driving like always, and things come to me in my head while I'm just driving and listening to music. And again, this is why I know that Sirius XM plays A Love Bizarre every day because I happen to hear it every day when I'm in
So
my car.
true.
So ever since I told D'Angela I'm going to write about this, it's like I hear it every day. And there is always a reminder, you need to think about this. Well, right next to the groove in my car, my Sirius, is Fly, which is the old school hip hop station. So going between the two, I'm like, there's a connection here. And then I thought about, I'm like, that's right, you forgot about this was in Crush Groove. Now I've only seen Crush Groove once, and that was back in '85. So I hadn't seen it in 40 years. And so I was like, but I started thinking about it and I was like, well, there are some connections here. But it also goes back to that the way that I started. I literally was trying to answer that question, what's a goon to a goblin? And as I'm thinking when I was listening to Love Bizarre, the answer is Spooky Electric. And the reason is they're the same. They're both the same evil. So I was like, that makes sense. So I can do the two. Let me see how this looks if I put the two side by side. And then I started taking the song apart, playing it bit by bit by bit, and then going and playing a hip hop track next to it and breaking down the different pieces. And that's how I.
That is absolutely fascinating. Well, that was a great presentation. As I said, I was
Yep.
so enthralled because it brought me back into that era of Crush Groove, which was so much fun and hip hop and brought back all kinds of memories. Now, Lee Christian has a question for Chris. How high does Sheila rank in your Prince ladies list? Speaking as someone who had quite the crush, quote unquote, and that is a KRUSH, by the way, on her during the Sign of the Times and Love Sexy era.
Yeah, I love that little pun. Yeah, for me, Sheila is at the top of the list. I saw an interview with Susan Rogers, one of Prince's recording engineers, and she described Vanity as the ideal woman. And I would actually, in Prince's world, I would actually apply that label to Sheila because she plays instruments, maybe not the amount of or the number of instruments that Prince plays, but I mean, she plays percussion to a virtuoso level. She plays basketball. She's very competitive. She's beautiful. So to me, she's like an I'm every woman. I mean, um, so I don't know anyone in Prince's universe who matches up to Sheila, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think obviously she is probably at the top of the list of the great musicians in his world. I mean, look at the career that she has had since she worked with him and all the things that she has done. And as someone who's seen her both during the Prince era and post Prince era, I mean, her shows are great now. She has great musicians working with her. She's not going to give you that same lengthy drum solo, but she will step out and give you at least one these days. There's a question from Celie for both of the panelists. In real time, did either of you have a definitive line or distinction between Prince and hip hop? Why or why not?
Yes and no. I'll have to say probably no in the earliest form because of how my household was. So my dad was a DJ at a radio station that wasn't playing hip hop at the time, but my older brother, was a b-boy, and he's known. He's passed away since, but he's known for being one of the best graffiti artists in our town that we grew up in. My brother used to design people's Adidas for them, like literally airbrush and paint them and do the weaving of the laces. That was what my brother was known for. Um, and so I was a Prince girl. I loved Prince. So those two things lived side by side in me. Now, as the 90s progressed, there was this distinct putting the two in boxes because there were some things as Prince was going through his challenges with Warner Brothers that got weird for me. And hip hop was going through its challenges, but there was something familiar about it. And I realized now it was the sampling part of it. So I stuck with that. But now they really don't. I see the two in everything.
Yeah, and for me, it's educational when I hear people talk about like how hip hop didn't embrace Prince or the hip hop community didn't embrace Sheila E, even though she was in Crush Groove. Because maybe it's because I grew up in a mid-sized Midwestern city like Minneapolis, so I related so much to Prince. Hip hop and black music as I just saw hip hop and R&B as black music. I didn't know that there was such a strong dividing line because on the radio stations where I live and where I grew up, Columbus, Ohio, hip hop and R&B were played on the same station. You'd hear LL Cool J, then you'd hear Anita Baker, you'd hear Salt and Pepper, then you'd hear Whitney Houston. So I didn't know that there was this, dividing line. And Questlove has talked about how Prince doesn't get enough credit for songs like The Glamorous Life, the hip hop breakbeats. I think when people started making a distinction between Prince and hip hop was when Prince started like trying too hard, like trying to rap and trying to like have the,
Yeah.
microphone in the shape of a gun and trying to be gangsta. I just think it was like he was more hip hop when his attitude was just like, I'm a nonconformist. I'm gonna do what I want to do. I'm not gonna participate in the celebrity sing along. That was a hip hop attitude. When he started trying to like, really, really, really kind of bend over backwards to like follow trends instead of create his own trends, I think that's when like he kind of lost the cool factor a little bit. And I saw Crush Groove in the theater with my cousins when it came out, and nobody in my community was saying like, "Oh, Sheila E doesn't belong in this." It was like Sheila
Mm.
E's hot, you know, she's she's just like Lisa or the real Roxanne. She's this hot Latina, and we love the fact that she's embracing hip hop. So I personally didn't understand it's only as an adult that I've learned that, oh, hip hop didn't fully embrace Prince and Sheila E. So that was my take on it.
But I think it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, Chris. It's about where you're from. I
Okay.
grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. So the percentage of Black people in Connecticut is actually smaller than it is in Minnesota, just because the sheer number of people and the size of the state, right? So we only had a part-time R&B station, and that was owned by Yale at the time that I was growing up. And we had an AM R&B station. So if you wanted to hear any of this stuff, you had to hear pop radio, right? And the only time you heard on hip hop was University of New Haven would play a hip hop show underground on Saturday nights at night, late at night. And so again, it has to do with where you're from, because it was news to me today to hear about this non-embrace of Sheila E. in this film, because at 10 years old, I didn't remember that.
Before I started working for Def Jam, I worked for a small AM station in Boston. And that was in the 80s. And that was around the time that New Edition and all of those groups were breaking out. But once I got to New York and started working for Def Jam, the thing about hip hop back then is that it was a burgeoning music form. It was people coming out of the hoods of of the Bronx and New York City, creating this new youth-oriented music form similar to rock and roll, if you will. And I think hip hop, as I remember it, everybody embraced everything. It was hip hop, it was grunge, it was everybody kind of coming together. I think we see it as these siloed forms of music. And honestly, they really weren't, because so many people across so many different genres were truly excited by hip hop and found it cool and sexy and interesting. And I think when it came to Prince, I mean, Prince was cool, sexy, and interesting. So he was someone that anybody who was in hip hop was going to embrace, because people just felt like this dude was so truly being himself. And so I think that Sheila's inclusion in Crush Groove was just a part of that mixing of these various genres. You got to remember Madonna was popping then, and Madonna came out of New York City street culture as well. So it was not then as siloed
And
as
people
we
thought
think.
Madonna was black at first.
Right. When she came out with Borderline and songs, or what was her first song?
Yeah.
Lucky
Everybody,
Star. Yeah.
yeah. And people did. They were at that point. There were no visuals on Madonna, but those street culture dance scenes out of New York and the dance community and the grunge community, all of those folks were seen as youth music and rebellious and creative. And so a lot of people across genres really embraced hip hop as well. And Prince was no different. And again, if these were guys who were young and coming up with this cool new music form, they saw Prince in the same way. And I think that he just coming out of Minneapolis, not a traditional music center, he just was
Right.
someone who got so much respect because he was very, as what did Eddie Murphy say about him? He was a fearless mofo, and everybody just
Mhm.
was connected to that sense. And people in hip hop were coming up with kind of that same thing, being very fearless. We do have a question from Lee Christian. Aisha, do you have a favorite Prince sampling song or song Prince sampled?
I have a favorite song that sampled Prince, and there's actually a story behind it. In 1989, and I mentioned it, Nice and Smooth, which was one of my favorite hip hop groups back in the day, released No Delaying, which is a sample of Starfish and Coffee. And no one else knew that this was a sample of a Prince song in my sphere. Okay. None of my fellow cheerleaders, nobody else knew that this was a Prince song. I knew it. And fast forward years later, this is about 2010. Somehow I wrote record review for Camp Low, and Greg Nice of Nice and Smooth actually read the article, followed me on Twitter. So I asked him a question, and I was like, "Can you tell me about how you all came to this sample? Because it's one of my favorite Prince samples in hip hop because it's raw, it's very simple, very broken down." He said, "You would not believe it, but Prince actually gave us permission to use that sample when he wasn't given hip hop artists permission to use his samples at the time. I think the only one he gave permission to at that time was like MC Hammer for Pray when he used When Doves Cry. And it was because it was a song about praying. Okay, but he said Prince said there was no cursing in our song, and he liked the silliness of the lyrics. Yeah, and that's how that starts. And so here you have this song, Starfish and Coffee in itself is actually just as silly as the lyrics of No Delaying when you sit and you listen to them. And I had to ask if Dizzy Gillespie actually played a saxophone because I only knew him to play a trumpet, and Greg Nice informed me that he did.
And if I could answer, if I'm not wrong about this, Public Enemy's "Fight the Power" has a sample from
Yeah,
"Play in the Sunshine," "Gotta Get Over." I love that. I love that little snippet from because "Play in the Sunshine" is such a playful, childlike song, and "Fight the Power" is anything but. I mean, it's like
yeah.
raw and it's a fist pumping anthem. So to have that little like childlike sample from "Play in the Sunshine," I just thought was an interesting contrast. And Chuck D actually spoke at my university where I work, Ohio State, and he just raved about Prince and how uh, people of Prince's generation were like real musicians, and he loved, even as a young hip hop head, going to see real musicians play, and how that's like something that he misses for his own children. So
Yeah.
yeah, Chuck D, I
Actually,
didn't
in
get to.
'98, I had a conversation with Chuck D and my
Oh,
professor, Dr. Raymond Wimbush. He's at Morgan State now because Dr. Wimbush invited Chuck D for a conference. And I talked to them both about Prince, and we were talking about Crystal Ball.
oh wow,
And that's how Dr. Wimbush became my favorite professor because I walked in his office and he was playing Crystal Ball.
wow.
And thank you to everyone on the panel, Aisha K. Staggers, Chris Bournea, and of course, as always, our fearless leader there in the background, D'Angela Duff, and the entire Polished Solid staff, very deserving of their flowers. Thank you so much for bringing us together again in this gathering. And I'm really glad that we got a chance to connect Prince to hip hop. Those were obviously special times for me personally because I was a disciple of both during that era. And thank you so much for all the great work that you did. I think we've got one more question. I'll take it from Lee Christian. What was the first track that sampled It? I'm not, are you talking the song It or something else?
So he's talking about Aisha. What was the song that
Oh,
sampled Starfish and Coffee?
I'm putting it in the chat. It's Nice and Smooth, no delaying.
Awesome. Thank you so much both for brilliant, really brilliant presentations. You gave Sheila E her flowers. I don't think she gets enough flowers. So thank you so much for giving Sheila her flowers. Thank you so much, Tonya, for your amazing moderation. And because Christopher can't join us, we actually have a long time for our break, which is kind of good. You can go out and get some play in the sunshine, and you can actually have a really long, nice meal, maybe even take a nap. And we will return here at 2:30 p.m. for our family portion of the symposium. We'll start off with a family roundtable that I'm very excited about at 2:30. Let me share my screen. I'm not going to repeat everybody's name again because nobody wants that when we can go play in the sunshine. But you'll see some heavy hitters for the family roundtable at 2:30. Then we'll take another 30-minute break, and then we will have our final session, which will be family presentations. I'm really looking forward to that. And then for the last 30 minutes, if you want to come on camera like we did last night and recap the weekend, that would be really wonderful. But I know some of you might be really tired, and I know everyone is super busy. So if you don't have time for that, I totally understand. But I wanted to give a moment for us to be together in community, because that's when you'll be able to turn on your cameras and turn on your audio and talk to us and be in community before we go back to the real world. So take advantage of our long break. This is a rarity. All right. See everyone very soon at 2:30. And thank you again, Aisha, Chris, and Tonya. And I'm ending this session.